Audio Jungle.
Welcome to the first episode ever of Green Bay Packers Delayed Draw. Hopefully the first of many episodes, might add. So what are we going to talk about here today on the very first Delayed Draw podcast? Well, I guess to start, once again, welcome. Glad to have you here. Hope you stick around for many more episodes. I want to start by introducing myself. I've been a Green Bay Packers fan since 1978. Okay, probably more like 1982, 1983, because I don't really remember those first couple of years. But some of my very earliest memories were of Packers Sunday and spending that time with the family. When I grew up in Wisconsin, I was born and raised in Wisconsin, about an hour north of Green Bay. Tiny little town called McAllister. If you want to zoom out a little bit, it's the Wasaukie area. Zoom out a little further, Marinette area. So some of you might be familiar with that, might not be. But yeah, I grew up there. Was born and raised. Spent my first 18 years of life in Wisconsin, and then went into the military. Ended up in Oklahoma for most of my adult life, from about 19 years old on. Save for a small stint I spent out in Pennsylvania for 2.5 years. And just this year, I moved to Las Vegas. So I am now a proud G-bearing Wisconsinite living in Las Vegas. Yeah, love the Packers. Always have, always will. Good or bad. I lived through the 80s, so came out on the other side smelling like roses. So that's a little bit about me. If you have any questions or comments about who I am, feel free to comment that. The podcast. Why am I doing this? I love the Packers. It's called Delayed Draw for a reason too. What I really intend to do is basically immediately after the games, a day after the game, you get all the main reactions and commentary about what just happened. But I've always listened to that stuff, and then like a couple of days later, I always think to myself, well, why didn't they talk about this, or why did this other thing never come up? So I wanted to kind of do this podcast to give those first couple of days time to stew and think about some of the commentary and hit spots that I felt were missed. And it's called the Delayed Draw because it's delayed, it's a few days late, and draw because I got a little teleprompter action over here that I can do every now and again when I need to emphasize a point, and we'll be using that a little bit later. So that's what's going on here. That's why I'm doing this. That's what it is. And want to make this a weekly thing, at least during the season, obviously, because it's in reaction to the games. We'll see what happens when the off season rolls around. It always gets to be a little downtime there, and feel like the media generally does a pretty good job of digging up all the stories and working those over. So we'll see. If I come up with something I need to comment on after the season's over, we'll run across that bridge when we get to it. Obviously, I'm starting this podcast a little late in the season. We're already 3 games in. So I want to go back and touch a little bit, just real briefly on the first couple games. So let's rewind back to the Saints game. I think just about everything that needed to be said about that game was said. It was a dumpster fire in every way, shape, or form. But one thing that I thought about was so many opinions came out about Rodgers, and was he throwing it, was he trying to throw the team under the bus, yada, yada, yada. which obviously now, 2 weeks later, we're all pretty sure that's not the case. But at the time, there was a lot of not rumors, but opinions being thrown about that subject. What popped into my head was like, this isn't the first time Rodgers has done this. Granted, it's super rare that it happens, but this wasn't the first time. I think the reason it got that much of a reaction, why people were worried about Rodgers not caring and whatnot, is obviously the offseason, all the shit that happened with that. But I think had this have happened in the middle of the season, you wouldn't have heard any of that. Everyone would have just went along with the whole, hey, is a stinker. It happens. Let's move on. But since it was the very first game of the season, everyone kind of lost their shit and I guess just assumed Rodgers was done. Like, take that, Green Bay. But then, of course, we found out a couple weeks later, or a week later, really, that that's not the case. So I really think had that happened a few more games into the season, everyone would have been upset about it because it would have been a horrible game. But I don't think the whole Rodgers doesn't care thing would have even reared its ugly head. So that's a little bit I got on that game. The Lions game, again, I feel like most of the media hit what they needed to hit with that. But I want to kind of expand on one thing. Everyone always just says, yeah, but it's the Lions. It's just the Lions. We only beat the Lions. It was a good game. We played well, but it was just the Lions. I fully, wholeheartedly disagree with that sentiment. I mean, these are all NFL teams. There's only been, two teams in the history of the NFL who have had no-win seasons. Granted, one was the Lions, but just the fact that it's gone that long, and I'm sorry, 3, wasn't it? It was Tampa Bay, Detroit, and Cleveland had one, didn't they? But still, 3 teams, and how many teams? That being said, even the worst of the worst, aside from those teams, have won at least one game. So it is always possible to lose a game, no matter how bad of a team you're playing. You could have those days where it's just you played bad, they played good, and they beat you. The Lions always play us tough on top of that. So I don't ever say, well, we won, but it was just so and so. I don't care. I don't care who the other team is. They can beat you. So yeah, it wasn't just the Lions. It was a good win, and you always take a good win. That win counts the same against the Lions as it does against the 49ers, as it would against Tampa Bay, as it would against Carolina and every other team in the league. So don't ever take a win for granted. Ever. Never. Doesn't matter who you beat. Take it. Feel good about it. One other thing I want to touch on the Stokes versus King commentary. That wasn't necessarily specifically Lions game oriented, but I think it's a good place to bring it up because that's when Stokes got the most playing time up to that point. I personally am not a Kevin King hater. Do I think he's great? No. Do I think he deserves to start over Stokes? After a couple of weeks, start to think no. Stokes is looking pretty good. However, Kevin King, I don't put in the bad DB category. Up until that Tampa Bay game and NFC Championship game last year, he had some ups and downs, but he wasn't terrible. He played decent. My biggest gripe with him was his tackling. It wasn't so much his coverage. And then getting beat deep in the Tampa Bay game, basically it put it over the top. Everyone wanted his blood after that. Same thing with the whole Rodgers deal. Had that have happened in another game, we wouldn't have been happy, obviously. But I don't know that it would have been such a divisive thing, such a rage-inducing thing. And then that carried over. I think there's a lot of recency bias when the season started. We hate Kevin King because he gave up that big play, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He did give up a couple of big plays this season, but aside from those, you didn't hear his name a whole lot, and that's kind of what you like with your DBs. Again, not saying he's a great DB, not saying he's a great cornerback. I'm saying he's probably somewhere in the middle of the road. I think he's better than what we've had under him the last few seasons. I think Stokes so far has proved that he probably belongs in that role. So don't take this as me being a super Kevin King sympathizer. I don't think he's horrible. I think he's a good depth guy to have. The worst part is the draft pick we spent on him, really. You know, he's not as good as his draft stock was. So I would say maybe just lighten up on him a little bit. He's already seems to have, for lack of a better way to put it, lost his role. So let's pump the brakes on the whole Kevin King hate. I think he's a good guy to have in a backup role if Stokes were to go down, or God forbid Jaire go down. He wouldn't be the worst possible thing to have there. That's really all I have to say about that, to be honest. He's not terrible. Not great, not terrible. So, moving on to the 49ers game. I was listening to Marcus Eversole the day after the game, I believe it was. And he kept trying to avoid commentary on the referees, which maybe that's a mainstream media thing. That might be kind of a bad juju to talk about the refs, kind of like a player talking about the refs. But one comment he said at one point kind of struck me. And it was something along the lines of only losers talk about the refs, which is generally a true statement. We lost. It was the refs' fault. We lost, blah, 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 blah. I kind of disagree with his sentiment, though. I think the best time to talk about the refs is when you've won, when you don't have to use them as a scapegoat. You can come back and say, hey, we won despite the refs. They were awful, and we won despite them. So let's talk about why they were so awful. When you say that after losing, you come off as kind of being a sore loser, whiny. It's the refs' fault. Screw that. Let's talk about the refs. They were awful. They were terrible. Both ways. I see a lot of people enraged about the calls against the Packers, and they're rightfully so. However, in the first half, there were at least 2 calls that went our way that I was just kind of like, I mean, you kind of you take it, but you're like, I'd be freaking irate if that was against me. Fast forward to the second half, and there it is. So yes, they were absolutely horrendous. But there were a couple of calls that I feel like were a little bit closer than people think. Not saying the calls were good by any stretch of the imagination. I just want to talk a little bit about what the refs probably saw, may have seen, and why they might have threw the flags. I was getting a bit of a Twitter discussion with some folks about the Stokes interference in the end zone. It looked to me like really good defense. He did have his arm around the defender, but he wasn't turning him. He wasn't moving him, at least as far as I could tell. And of course, we always get the benefit of slow motion. But even in real time, I watched it back a little bit, and I didn't see much. However, when you're a referee standing in the end zone and things are going 1,000 miles an hour, and you see a DB with his arm literally around the receiver, you might be inclined to throw that flag. Again, not saying it was the correct call, but I can at least understand why the flag was thrown. I would say probably 50% of the time in that situation, you're going to get a flag thrown. If you got your arms on the defender, they're probably going to get you for it, even though by the rule, if you're not obstructing the receiver in any way, it should be legal. So I can at least understand that one. The other one I want to talk about is the intentional grounding, no call on Jimmy Garoppolo. And this is probably the one that's going to be the most polarizing with people because it was close. A lot of people are saying it was obvious grounding, obvious grounding. It wasn't. There's one angle that was shown right after halftime. I'm going to show it here in a second. That makes it a little less obvious. Could it still have been called? We'll talk about it here in a sec. Let me switch over to the good old teleprompter here. See if this is working right. All right, there we are. There we are. So, you see right now, Garoppolo's, he's looking left, he's looking. I'm going to play it and pause it again real quick.
An intentional grounding here. Garoppolo
looking left, looks right, looks at the guy at the middle. Okay, he's looking straight ahead. He's looking at the dude. Get my little deal out. He's looking at that guy, right? So far, so good. All right. Oops. Sorry about that. So now he's getting chased. And back it up a little bit there. For a split second, whoa, went a little too far back. For a split second, he looks to the right, and there is a receiver there. He's covered, but he's there. See if I can pause it at the right time. Right there. He is looking at, oops. He is looking at this guy.
Gets outside the
now he is
going down for the sack.
I tried to pause it there. He pulled his arm back as if he was going to throw it to that guy before the defender hits him. Right there. His arm is cocked. He's trying to throw. He's not been hit yet, but he's cocking his arm to throw. He's not throwing it in the dirt. He's looking at another receiver. He gets hit, and that ball, he fully throws it. The ball gets popped out of his hand when he gets hit. And it goes straight down.
He's going down for the sack, gets it away. No receiver.
Okay, so the ball hit where there was no receiver. Let me switch back. So the ball did hit where there was no receiver. He was looking at a receiver when he threw it. Now, this is up to the ref. And again, I'm not saying this shouldn't be intentional grounding. I'm saying it's a much closer call than we originally thought. Referees are not supposed to ref on intent. They can't look at that play and say, oh, he looked like he was trying to throw it to that receiver. So in that regard, it probably should have been intentional grounding. But they may have also looked at him and said, hey, he was looking at the receiver, he was getting ready to throw, and then he got hit and the ball got knocked to the ground. Someone on Twitter also, I wish I would have clipped that. Someone on Twitter posted the actual rule, and the rule stated if the ball, when coming out of the quarterback's hand, is redirected due to a hit, basically, that it can't be called intentional grounding. And that's probably what the refs saw. That's probably why they didn't call it. Again, I'm not saying it shouldn't have been, or it should have been called or shouldn't have been called. I just think it was a real close call. And that angle shows it way better than the other angles. The first angle that they show numerous times, it looks like he obviously just threw it in the dirt. That angle right there that I just showed you guys, I don't know where to point because it took over the whole screen. It wasn't nearly as obvious. So that does not let the refs off the hook by any means. Pretty much every other call they made in that game was awful. The hit on Davante Adams, the helmet-to-helmet thing, it did look to me like he hit the underside of his helmet. That's to me. I'm just a schlub. What the hell do I know? If it wasn't helmet-to-helmet, at the very least, it should have been roughing on a defenseless receiver. Because he did not make a tackle move. He threw his entire fucking body into him. So that should have been a flag, obviously. The Alexander roughing the quarterback. I mean, did his hand graze his helmet? Yeah. You got to let that one go, though. It's not like he came down directly on his head. That rule to begin with is awful, but you know, when a guy jumps up to block the pass and it comes down right on a quarterback's head, yeah, per the rule, that should be flagged. When you hit him in the shoulder and your hand kind of grazes the side of his helmet, come on now. Terrible call. The interference calls on Stokes, aside from the end zone, were terrible. The calls against San Francisco in the first half were pretty ticky-tacky. Just bad all around. That was some of the worst officiating I've ever seen. And I am never one to blame refs after a game. I hate doing it. I think most people hate doing it. Nobody wants to blame the refs. But I was getting ready. I was getting real ready that game. Like, I don't want to do it, but my God, these guys are just giving gifts left and right. So, yeah, that's my commentary on the refereeing that game. And that's about it. That's all I wanted to bring up for this episode. I want to try and do this weekly. Hopefully I'll get it out earlier in the week next time. I'd like to get it out no later than Wednesday night. I guess this is Wednesday now, but this would be the absolute latest. I'd prefer to get it out on Tuesday, or maybe even Monday night if I've already seen a lot of commentary and heard a lot of talking heads at that point. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. This is probably going to evolve over time. Right now it's just me talking about the games. Eventually I would like to get, possibly get some guests on here. Maybe just other fans to just discuss things with. Doesn't really matter. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Who knows? If this goes far enough, does well enough, maybe we'll get to start doing like interviews with some people, you know what I'm saying? But the last thing I wanna leave you with is basically look at me as the level head, if you would. I'm not the type of guy when I watch a Packers game. I'm not the type of guy that leaps out of my chair and stomps around the room when something bad goes on. At most, you might hear me give a hell yeah or give a good clap or something, but I generally don't get too high or too low. And so when the game ends and I see a lot of reactions on Twitter or listen to commentary and people are kind of losing their shit, I'm the guy that doesn't really do that. I like to look at all sides of the thing. For like the Garoppolo example, and just kind of look at it from a different view than just a diehard Homer fan. You know what I'm saying? The people who just everything bad that happens to you is the worst thing, and everything good that happens to the other team is the worst thing. And it's just it's football. It's a game. It's not the end of the world, you know. So that's the way I try to play it. I try to play it even keel. So if you're looking if you're looking for a place to go after the Packers lose and you're raging, come here and I'll try to talk you off the ledge. And if we're having a super great week because they won, and you're feeling just too good about yourself, like that's possible. But if you're feeling a little too good, come here and I'll tone it down a bit. I'll get you ready for the next game. Speaking of which, we got Pittsburgh coming up. I think it should be a pretty good game. I think it's one that we should win pretty easily, the way Pittsburgh is playing. But you never know. They're the Steelers. Big Ben can pull some crazy shit out of his ass, so you never know. But yeah. Until next time, for the time being, you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle I'll post up here in just a second. For In the Past OKC. I'm eventually going to change that over to the Green Bay Packers delayed draw. I'll let everyone know when that's happening, what the handle is, and hopefully I can get some of you to switch over there. But yeah, until next week, have yourself a wonderful rest of this week and weekend, and go Pack Go. See you later.